all. Good to be with you. It's I was mentioning to somebody just a moment ago, it's good to be able to preach with my sleeves rolled up again. It's just good to be up here. I hope you are all well. Today marks, for me anyway, in the last few years, and I think stretching back 14, 15, 16 years, kind of a first, new way of being at Christ Church that I want to draw out to you. And it may be that we've done this before. Today, sort of everything in our lives is oriented toward one thing. Just kind of, that's not generally how we do things at Christ Church. Usually we like to spread out and all go in our different directions, but do that together. Well, today's a little bit different. I want to walk you back to 2014 and describe how we got to today in order to describe today better. In 2014, this parish underwent a strategic visioning summit of sorts, right? We had multiple weeks really together. We called 40 or 50 leaders of the parish together, and we had a facilitator come in. This is standard business for churches, especially churches of this size, right? We were a church with 6,400 members, an annual budget of $4.5 million, thousands of really active folks, and we really had not in a while come together with a picture of where we were going or how we were going to get there. We hadn't gotten tactical with that yet. It was a good idea. If you saw another business with all these employees and a $4.5 million budget and they didn't have a mission statement, you would wonder, right? So here we were, bringing in our consultant. Back then, we came up with a lovely vision and a beautiful mission statement that has remained active, and we came up with a couple of focal points. One of them was that we were going to be a church focused on discipleship, and that when we said discipleship, we really were talking about, at the time, 6 things. And try to remember them all for you. I ought to remember them by now. We were going to focus on worshiping and prayer, giving and service, fellowship, being together, right? Just for the sake of being together. I went out of order, so I have forgotten one now. Let's see. Worship. Study. That was the one that I'm responsible for. Oh my gosh. Formation. Yeah, that we were going to be a church that focused on those things, right? So worship and study and fellowship, giving and service. See, I've forgotten one again. Study? Did I forget study again? Oh, gosh. It's too long of a list. What we did in 2014 was come up with that list. And then we just said, well, let's do that. And we never thought about how we would do that, right? We didn't think about how are we going to encourage 6,000 people to incorporate into their lives worship or fellowship or study or prayer or service or giving. I got them all that time. Had to do it one more time just so I could make sure I got them all. And we struggled for, I think, a couple years after that. Well, here's the lead up into now is we started to undergo this strategic vision in a way that was going to affect our campus, and we were going to lose tens of thousands of square feet, and we were going to have to stop doing things that we have been doing for so many years. What a great time to settle back into. Well, now, maybe if we stop doing a lot of stuff, maybe now we can focus on doing exactly what we need to do to achieve our goals. Only then we discovered that we had missed something in that process. We had said that people who follow Jesus do these 6 things, forgetting altogether that people who follow Jesus, people who have a relationship with Christ or with God, also observe in some way Sabbath. That we take the opportunity at least once a week to step back from all of our doing just to be in the presence of God, to let God do the work, to let God say to us, you know what, you are a beloved child, not because of what you've done on the other 6 days, just because you are. And from that place of rest and restoration and refreshment, we go back into our work. We had missed that. It's not surprising, is it? Right? Because we miss that so often. We're very doing-oriented people. I am a very doing-oriented person. I'm guessing most of you are as well. I know you all well enough to know, yes, you are, right? We're action-oriented. We are people who have watches that tell us even if we are doing well with our sleep. We measure our sleep, people. Come on. We count our calories at a press of a button. We can determine where our net worth is today. We measure everything to determine whether or not we are good enough somehow. Somewhere deep down, there is this thing that says, I've got to keep pushing along with all these things that I'm doing so that I can determine whether or not I've made it. That's very much what we had set out to do in 2014. Missing that is somehow not bad or wrong, but that's what we do after we rest in God's goodness and grace. There's a lot more that can be said about that alone, and we will have many other opportunities to talk about it. On 6 days, God creates something out of nothing. On the seventh day, God creates nothing out of the something that God made. On the eighth day, God passes that to us and says, now go and do the work that I've called you to do. And we somehow missed that God passed that off to us on the seventh day and that we were to rest that day. So back in the spring, we had an opportunity to have a collection of courses where we were focused on these things. We called them anchors of the soul. It was lightly attended, so I'm just going to assume that most of y'all probably weren't there. I know a couple of you were. So we did this work, and one of the things that I think we found was that when we talked about prayer, everybody said, great, sign me up. When we talked about resting, everybody objected and said, I can't. Work's too hard right now. My family life is kind of crazy. I'm their primary caretaker, and I've got to take care of them. What will happen if I put my cell phone down for a little while? Things would fall apart. Right? We started to go down that path. We are action-oriented people, right? The idea that we wouldn't follow and pursue our actions and instead would step back into rest was a really quick and hard no for a lot of folks, myself included. Really struggled with that. That was probably the most eye-opening moment for the leaders of this church in determining that we can't go forward with the other things. We cannot be a church that says that we worship God in the beauty of holiness or that we serve the rest of the world if we don't start from a place of just understanding God's love for us, of resting in that. If that's not our base, if that's not our building block, if that's not our foundation, then nothing else can be built upon it. Nothing else can be built upon it. Yet here we were trying to build. So for this fall, what we decided we would do is get back to that building block. We brought in Dr. Matthew Sleeth. He's preaching downstairs today. You're missing a great sermon downstairs from Dr. Sleeth. He'll be here on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to do a keynote address. He's the author of a book called 24/6, How to Live in a World That Is 24/7. How do we live Sabbath lives? The lives that God called us to live. What's the detrimental nature of living a life that's constantly plugged in? Do you know what the detrimental nature is of that life? I do, and I bet you do too, actually. We'll get there in a second. So Dr. Sleeth is here to kick off our small groups and all the other ways that we're going to explore this topic together. But the bottom line is that as a congregation, we've got to learn about and experience and incorporate Sabbath into our lives if we're going to do any of the other work that we've been called to do. If we're going to do any of the other work of discipleship. And it's going to be hard. Because most of you are like me, I know. And that most of you are really, really, you find a lot of value in being doers. And it's really hard to take a break every now and then. The detrimental side of that, of course, is all the stress we bring upon ourselves. But more importantly, it's about the nature of the relationships that become a little bit damaged. It takes Sabbath to be this way. And by the way, I'm going to say this now. I'll say this dozens of other times this fall. I will never be the one who stands here and says, I've got the Sabbath thing figured out. Come and follow me. I'm going to be the one who stands here and says, and one another. It's time for us to be a Sabbath people. This fall and forever as Christ Church, let's be a Sabbath people. After we learn how to rest together We can get back to doing all the things that we do in the name of Christ to transform lives through the love of God in Christ. But let's first be transformed by taking a breath, by taking a rest, by listening to the voice of God who commands us and teaches us to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy, to take Christ's yoke upon us and hand him our burdens, and to receive the full restoration of a God who loves us, not because of what we do, but because of who we are. Amen.